Welcome into college football addiction. We're going to talk about something today that we don't dive into a lot, but I want to get your thoughts. Honestly, this is not trying to be a hot take video. This is not trying to enrage the masses, although we may do that at times. That's not necessarily what we're doing here. We don't really talk about recruiting a lot, and I'm not going to get super deep or dive super far into any specific recruiting player or anything of that nature, but we will talk about it. Alabama is recruiting at a great level. And I'll tell you, Alabama fans, I really wanted to make this video so that we could have a platform to try and get your take on this and your take in general on two things. So I'd love you to live in the comments. Again, if you want to attack me for bringing this up, that's fine, but I really kind of just want to gauge your perspective. Alabama fans have been great on the channel this year. We've gotten a ton of views on Alabama videos, both positive and negative, that we've brought people on, that we've talked about different games, different things that have happened. And so I'd really like to hear from you on this. But On3 posted this graphic, and you may already know where we're going. That kind of blew my mind. And there's some shock factor in this. And so I want to get, first of all, your opinions on this. On3 posted this graphic where the top 10 Alabama recruits signed. State of Alabama, right? And as you can see, that graphic is littered with the Auburn logo. There is a ton. What is that? 8 of the top 10 Alabama high school recruits signed with Auburn. Now, one went to Ohio State, one went to Oregon, and that rounds out your top 10. Alabama didn't have anyone on that list for the first time since the Saban era started. And then even before that, I just was tired of looking once we got back to 2005, 2004, and beyond. I'm using On3, so if they have somebody in the top 10 a different year on 247 or whatever, that's fine. Is this, in general, a concern? That's the first question I want to ask Alabama fans. Is this a concern for you? Is this something you're worried about at all? Or the other side of this, is this rage bait? Is this On3 knowing that you will click on this, that you will reply to this, knowing that you will quote tweet it and then further their reach because they know you're a passionate fan base? Is it a concern at all? Running through the years, though, just very quickly, in 2025's recruiting class, obviously Alabama had none of the top 10 recruits. 24, they had 4 of them. Auburn did have 5, so they beat you out just barely there. 23 had 4 of 10. That was the most. 22, 6 of 10. 21, 3 of 10. That was the most, but that was also the COVID year, so kind of throw that one out. 20 had 7 of 10. 19, 4. 18, you had 1 of 10. Auburn did have 4 that year. 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11. You had the most each one of those years. 10, 9, 8, 7. You also had the most each one of those years. It's not just the top 10 either. I was thinking, well, you posted that graphic On3, and Alabama probably had a bunch through the 11 through 20. There was only 1 in the 11 through 20 rankings. I believe he's number 13 or 14. And so the question is that a concerning trend, or is this maybe just a weaker overall state of the class this year? What are your thoughts on that? The second thing I would ask, or maybe the other side of that, is obviously Alabama is still recruiting at a very elite level. They've got the number 2 class in the country for 2025. And so overall talent still very high for the Crimson Tide. I don't really think there's much of a drop-off there. Now, I don't know that the class is still as elite as some of those Saban classes when he was pulling in some of the most absurd 5 and 6 stars out there. But when you look at the rest of college football, still a very, very elite class. The other question I have for you, not specifically on those 10, right? That top 10, that graphic of, I want to know your thoughts on whether or not that's just rage bait, whether it is something to kind of give you some pause. What are they not relating as well to the kids in Alabama? Is there less of a focus there because DeBoer is coming from somewhere else? Obviously, he didn't have the inroads with the Alabama recruits that Saban probably did. But the other side of that is, if you look at who has the number 6 class in the country, it's Auburn. And so I would ask, Is Auburn's surge in recruiting more of the concern, right? Now, they're still not recruiting at Alabama's level. They're still not up to number 2, right? There's a gap between 2 and 6, and it's a pretty apparent gap. The number 2 class, I've always kind of thought the top 3 or 4 classes, there was a pretty wide gap between the classes of 6 and 12, right? That it more than just like 6 or 8 or whatever. I always thought that there was a pretty well-defined gap between the very elite of the elite in recruiting. And I think that plays out on the field too. Look what we have in the playoff right now. We have 4 to 6 teams that can maybe win this thing. Maybe 3 to 5 is maybe a better number. But there are still good teams from 6 to 12, but they're just not elite. However, Auburn recruiting at number 6 is certainly closing the gap from where they have been in the recent past. Auburn recruiting at number 6 is still much better than Alabama in the top 5 and Auburn down there around 10, 15, where they've been in the recent past. Is that gap closing not only in the state, but also on a national level indicative of anything? Well, could it be indicative of a little bit of a slip from Alabama? Could it be indicative of Auburn selling a different kind of message that is resonating? Could it be an NIL concern? Listen, we have no doubts about it that Auburn has always been willing and certainly now is willing to overpay for recruits. That's not a shot at Hugh Freeze. That's not a shot at Auburn. But Auburn has always had to pay top dollar to get elite recruits. Alabama under Saban didn't have to do that, right? You kind of had the Saban impact built in there. Not to say they never paid recruits, not to say they never handed out McDonald's bags like they did at Tennessee. I'm not saying any of that. But coming at recruiting with the Saban angle, kind of like what benefits Kirby Smart right now at Georgia, is the promise of going to the NFL and playing there. And so Alabama hasn't had to be as aggressive in the NIL space under Saban. Do they have to be a little bit more aggressive under Kalen DeBoer? I would argue the answer to that is probably yes. You had Greg Byrne, their athletic director, literally come out and endorse their collective recently saying, guys, we're getting tampered with like crazy right now. You need to up the game. You need to start donating to Alabama's collective, and we need to be able to offer the most competitive NIL product possible. You don't really get the Saban benefit anymore. Here's another question, another angle of it, another aspect of it. If Alabama has another somewhat underwhelming season, right? And we can make all the arguments we want that Alabama should have been in. They were more deserving than this team or that team. They'd have been better in the playoff than this team or that team. And I agree with a lot of that. But what if Alabama has another season like they did this year at 9-3 or worse, right? They go 8-4 and Auburn continues to trend up, right? Auburn had a very mediocre season this year, a season that probably didn't live up to what they thought they could potentially do. But with a different quarterback and another year of the Hugh Freeze system and more elite recruits, what if Auburn does tick up just a bit? What if Auburn gets up to that 8-4 level and say a Saban-less Alabama has their second straight non-playoff year? Now, right now, I would project Alabama into next year's playoff. Number one, I think they'll bounce back a little bit. Number two, I think there will be some bias that gets them into the playoff. I think SMU got in this year because of what happened to Florida State last year. And I think that Alabama being that first team out this year, even if they have a 9-3 year, will probably bump them into the playoff next season. Now, we're a long way from that, right? 11 months away from knowing what next year's playoff looks like. But if Alabama trends down just one more year, if they struggle again next year and Auburn continues to tick up, does that recruiting start to shift even more in Auburn's favor? Those are the questions I have for Alabama. That is what I think we need to figure out. Obviously, quarterback play for both programs is going to be a massive, massive key to answering that question. And Alabama recruiting is in no way in trouble. They still have the number 2 class. Before you yell at me in the comments or say he's a hater or anything, no, I just want your thoughts. I want to know what you think about this. Is it a concerning trend at all that your biggest rival is now catching up to you in recruiting? Whether you think they're good recruiters or whether you think that there's promise in the program or whether you think they are just paying the biggest bag, which let me tell you something. That's the perception of Auburn from the outside, right? You guys know better than me, but that is the perception that Auburn will pay, and they will pay a pretty penny to land guys, whether it's recruiting or in the portal. Does that worry you at all? Does that make you think, wait a minute, if we slip just a little bit more with the resources that they're pumping into their program from a player perspective, is that trouble at all? Does it give you any pause? Does it give you any concern? Or is all of it just rage bait? Is all of it just On3 creating a narrative that you know is not really true? I am in no way trying to imply that Alabama is in any trouble recruiting, but here's what I know. You guys know it better than me. And that's why on this video, I don't care if you subscribe. I don't care if you like it. None of that really matters to me. I want the pulse. I want to know what you guys think. So let me know down in the comments. What's your concern level 1 to 10? What are your thoughts on the couple of things that we've mentioned here today? Let's talk down there in the comments. I appreciate you guys for tuning into College Football Addiction. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, a Merry Christmas, and we'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.